I'm Jessica Polk of the Current Consulting Group, and I'll be conducting today's presentation. We'd like to thank OraSure Technologies for hosting today's presentation entitled Rapid Drug Testing, an Overview. OraSure is a global leader in oral fluid substance abuse testing products. Their unique assays provide accurate and easy to administer testing methods to help determine the presence or absence of drugs or alcohol in a person's system. The Intercept Oral Fluid Drug Test is an FDA-cleared, laboratory-based oral fluid drug testing system that enables accurate testing for 9 drugs of abuse, including marijuana, cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, methamphetamines, barbiturates, benzodiazepines, methadone, and opiates. Intercept is fast and easy to administer and is ideal for workplace, criminal justice, drug treatment centers, clinical setting screening programs, and more. Today's presentation has qualified for continuing education credits from SHRM, CCDAP, and from HRCI for those who attend the entire presentation. That's the full 1 hour. Proof of attendance and information on how to obtain the credit will be sent after the webinar. Today's presenters are Casey Mahalik from Premier Biotech and Bill Current from the Current Consulting Group. Casey is the Vice President of Global Sales and Marketing for Premier Biotech. She has worked with dozens of top 100 retailers, staffing organizations, and manufacturing companies to implement more efficient, compliant, and cost-effective solutions for pre-employment drug testing, specifically using point-of-care oral fluid. She was instrumental in collaborating with the development of the OT-Scan mobile app and the algorithm which automates the test interpretation and eliminates the test subjectivity. Also with us today is Bill Current of the Current Consulting Group. He is the president and founder of the Current Consulting Group with 30 years of experience in the drug testing industry. He's authored 10 books on substance abuse related issues, and he regularly presents at conferences, seminars, workshops, and webinars, and is widely considered one of the leading experts on drug testing and the drug testing industry. And so with that, we are ready to turn the virtual microphone over to Casey to get us started.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jessica. So today I'll just go over at a high level in terms of the presentation agenda. I will spend a little bit of time talking through what is rapid drug testing, as well as the advantages of rapid drug testing. And then I'll turn it over to Bill, who will talk more specifically around why rapid drug testing, and then adding a rapid or instant drug test to your testing program. Rapid testing is essentially a preliminary screen, right? So the whole idea is to get this preliminary result, and it uses the exact same technology, which is called immunoassay technology, that laboratory screening instruments utilize. So it's a qualitative result. It gives us a yes/no answer. So for instance, if we take the opiate strip and we get a non-negative result for the opiate strip as this preliminary screen for the rapid test, that indicates that there's some opiate present or combination of opiates present in the sample. But with the screen, we can't know definitively whether that's morphine, codeine, or a Tylenol-3 prescription that maybe somebody has, if it's hydrocodone, for instance, coming from Vicodin, or if it's heroin or a combination of those. For that specific and that absolute specific result, we would need a confirmation test. But again, the idea with rapid tests is that they're giving you that preliminary presumptive result, and the goal of instant testing or rapid testing is really to weed out the negatives and get them to work or return them to work immediately. If the result is non-negative, that's when we have to perform additional confirmation testing. And whether we're doing that after a rapid test or after a screen at the laboratory, it's exactly the same. We're going to follow the same protocol. This particular image here is a shot of our OralFox device. This is our FDA-cleared rapid oral fluid device. It is cleared for 8 drugs. So you'll notice here that essentially when we talk about a rapid test, it's yielding results immediately, as opposed to collecting urine or oral fluid and sending that out to a lab for them to deliver a result within a few days. Jump to the next slide here. So typically for organizations that have chosen to utilize traditional collection site testing or laboratory testing solutions, they've chosen to do so because their biggest reservation or concern with rapid testing is having their employees have to read or interpret the result. So this is why we're really excited that our Oral Tox, which is FDA 510K cleared, now works with our newly launched app called the OT Scan. And essentially what this is that it's an app on a phone. So you download it from the App Store. And in the process, it's an algorithm that's actually automating that test interpretation and taking the subjectivity out of the test. So there's a couple of screenshots here, but essentially you run the Oral Tox, which is a very simple procedure. The donor essentially tests themselves, puts the swab in their mouth. An indicator changes color to show that you have enough saliva. And then instead of having your employees determine, is there a line, is there not a line, the OT Scan, which again is an algorithm that we've developed, will actually capture that image, automate the test interpretation. That funnels through our laboratory information system. And ultimately, the goal is to populate that into our customers' applicant tracking system or whatever solution that they use. So, again, for us, the reason that we get really excited about this is that obviously we believe very strongly in rapid testing and specifically rapid oral fluid testing. But prior to this mobile app, we didn't really feel like we had kind of this full comprehensive solution. So with the mobile app, automating that interpretation and generating that electronic documentation into an applicant tracking system, it's essentially giving customers that same documentation, that same process as they would get from a laboratory, traditional laboratory type of testing or a collection site model, in which, again, that result is populated back in their system within minutes, expediting that hiring process, and again, the goal of getting that candidate to work more quickly. So if we look at rapid versus laboratory-based collections, typically or historically, the biggest challenge with traditional collection site testing, so for example, Quest or LabCorp patient service centers, or using an eScreen type of collection site model, is the drop-off rate. So when I say the drop-off rate, I'm referring to when a job is offered to a candidate and the drug test is ordered, but that test never takes place. So maybe it's because the candidate doesn't have transportation to the collection site. Maybe it's because the candidate showed up, but they found out they had a 50 to a 75-minute wait, and they decided it wasn't worth it for them to sit around for their $12 an hour job. And so they leave to go get a job down the street because they could be placed immediately. So there's obviously lots of reasons why, but we had one of our major customers report that last busy season, 60% of their tests it was a staffing company, and they had particular clients that required them to utilize traditional urine testing. 60% of the time in which that drug test was ordered, it never took place. And so I think it resonates with all of our prospects when we start talking about, the advantage of rapid testing is that we don't lose that candidate. We have the candidate right in front of us. We can administer that drug test and within minutes have that result back and get them to work potentially the same day or next day, which runs into our next real challenge with the collection site model. Is their second pain point is really waiting those 2 to 3 days for the results from traditional laboratory-based testing. So again, the real value proposition of rapid testing is to weed out the negatives, get them to work immediately or return them to work if it's a post-accident or a random reasonable cause scenario. And if it's non-negative, we just want to make sure we're following that same confirmatory protocol with definitive testing with confirmations and MROs. But as we know, in the pre-employment side, positivity rates are between 4 and 5%. So that means that utilizing rapid testing technology, 95, 96% of the time, we can get them to work right away without risking that drop-off rate and without risking or wasting those 2 days waiting for those results. In addition, we have some cost savings that we'll talk about in slides after this, but just to walk through kind of the rapid testing procedure again. So the idea is that if you're using a solution similar to an oral tox, the HR person or whoever is designated from that company will essentially hand the test to the donor, and the donor can test themselves. The negative can get to work immediately. And if that is non-negative, we're going to follow that same confirmatory protocol to make sure that we're never calling the result of a screen a positive test. We're always going to perform that high complexity testing. Whereas if we look at the laboratory-based testing, we're requiring that person to go off site. We're hoping that they can get there. Then we have to transport that sample to the lab. And when it gets to the lab, it's going to utilize that same preliminary lab screening using that immunoassay technology that we use with the rapid test, but it takes 2 days longer. If it's non-negative, it's going to follow that same protocol as the non-negative rapid test. So it's just kind of, the goal is to really help articulate to prospects to understand that the rapid test or a lab-based screen are utilizing that same technology and spending a lot of time going through protocol and in those important situations. And well, what do you do when it's non-negative? So Oral Tox was really designed specifically to develop a product that was faster, more accurate, and easier to use than other devices on the market. And we're really proud because we think it accomplishes just that. We see huge value in terms of utilizing Oral Tox and rapid oral fluid testing technology in industries with high turnover like staffing, retail, hospitality, construction, and manufacturing, where there's this real need to get people to work quickly or to enable them to return to work after a post-accident situation. And so, again, those are kind of our sweet spots in terms of markets. Obviously, in terms of expediting the hiring process and getting candidates to work, we see the biggest value proposition applying to pre-employment testing. But it's interesting when we engage with a lot of prospects is their initial interest sometimes stems from the post-accident piece, just because that tends to be their biggest pain point, in which if there's an accident, now we have a situation and we know that the majority of accidents take place after hours or on the weekends, right? So now we have a situation where not only that employee that's in an accident, but potentially a supervisor, manager, another person needs to either figure out transportation or transport that person to a collection site, wait there with them for the urine test, and then wait maybe 2 days for those results. And based on a lot of companies' policies, sometimes they're suspending with pay until those results come back. And so you can see, again, the real immediate value add with having an instant test for those return to work type of situations as well. So next we'll get into our scenario or our poll question here. And so I'll read out the question, and then I believe Jessica is going to give you all an opportunity to respond with your answer. But Parker manages a retail store where workers' compensation claims and missing inventory numbers have increased. Parker decides that implementing a random drug screening program would be beneficial. Why should Parker choose rapid testing as part of her solution? We've got the following options here. Low cost, reduces the potential for adulteration, speed and ease of use, or all of the above. I'll give you a few seconds here to submit your answers. It looks like 95% of you answered correctly, which is all of the above. It is a natural adulteration deterrent, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the next section here. It is designed for the speed of ease of use, and it does provide a lower cost solution. So again, the correct answer is D, all of the above. So next we'll go into the advantages of rapid drug testing. probably first and foremost, we'll talk about the huge cost savings. And typically the most expensive part of traditional urine-based testing is the collection cost. So if you think of it again in terms of the Quest or Labcorp patient service centers, the majority of that cost, which is bundled to include the drug test as well as the collection, comes from somebody actually collecting that urine and processing it. And the second biggest expense of the traditional laboratory-based testing is the shipping of that specimen to the lab for testing to be performed. So with a rapid testing solution, we essentially remove or eliminate both of those costs by having our employees administer the tests. We don't have to ship them out to the lab, and we don't have to pay for that collection process. The nearly instantaneous results, obviously we've talked a lot about this, but traditional lab-based testing takes 24 to 48 hours for a negative. It can take over 72 hours for a non-negative. So, why wait those 2 to 3 days, 1 to 3 days for that result when you can get that candidate to work immediately or allow that employee to return to work immediately? This is really powerful when you talk to staffing agencies, especially because they make their money in billable hour revenue. And so when you're talking about potentially getting a candidate to work, 48 hours earlier, which is 2 days of work. So, take their hourly wage or commission that they're making times 16 hours, and that potential for billable hour revenue becomes significant really quickly, which I believe has really driven the adoption curve, accelerated the adoption curve for staffing in particular. And now we're really seeing growth within, as I mentioned, construction, hospitality, retail, manufacturing as well for a lot of these benefits. And as we've mentioned several times, rapid testing takes place in minutes. So we're preventing that drop-off rate of that candidate never showing up for that test. And we're also preventing that candidate or donor from having time to plan or prepare for the test, which actually leads us into our next slide as well. So if we talk about the rapid testing advantages, oral fluid testing specifically reduces the possibility for adulteration as well as the rapid testing. So the idea of this is if we can administer a test right there on the spot without, so if we think about the traditional urine-based model where we would offer a job, provide the candidate with their e-passport to report to that collection site, now they have time to plan or prepare essentially for that test, right? And so if we're offering the job and giving them that rapid test there right on the spot, there's no chance for that person to secure adulteration supplies, any oxidizing agents, or potentially if it's a post-accident situation for them to sober up and have some of that drug or alcohol metabolized. The next in the observed piece is specifically related to oral fluid, and I think it's really important to mention because another challenge of the traditional urine-based lab testing is that in the workplace testing, as you know, collections are unobserved. So there's some things that we can do. We can blue the toilet water. We can make people empty their pockets, leave their purses and backpacks. But really, when they go into that restroom and shut the door, we lose control of that process. There's all sorts of things that donors can do to cheat that test, whether it's bringing in synthetic urine that they can store to appear that it's the normal temperature range, a little bit of bleach underneath a fingernail, swirl it around in the urine is enough to kill any drug that may be present. Or really, it could be as easy as drinking a lot of water prior to going in for the collection, which would dilute that concentration and could potentially convert a positive into a negative result. And so with oral fluid testing, it's 100% observed, which prevents that opportunity for donors to be able to beat or cheat that test. And so again, just kind of going back to that concept of using this rapid test of oral tox along with this OT scan, we're really excited to be able to provide a solution that gives immediate results, gives a cost-effective solution that's 40 to 60% the cost of traditional laboratory testing, and at the same time providing that automated test interpretation without the risk of your employees interpreting it, and that electronic documentation of results that's ultimately populating that data back into the client's applicant tracking system, which is a big reason why companies choose to go with a laboratory-based solution a lot of times, just for that automation of the process itself. So we'll go on to the next slide here and look a little more closely at rapid oral fluid testing. We've obviously talked about a lot of these things. You can collect anywhere, anytime. We don't need a private restroom or bluing agents for the toilet water. We don't need to worry about what's happening behind that closed door. It's a much more cost-effective solution compared to traditional laboratory-based testing. We have FDA-cleared options. As I mentioned, OralTox is one of 2 FDA-cleared devices in the world, and it's the only device cleared for 8 drugs of abuse, including oxycodone, which is the second highest positivity rate following THC. The cons, and this one is an interesting one. So when we talk about detection windows, a lot of times we hear that people are risk averse. They don't like oral fluid testing because they've heard that you can't pick up THC. And the reality is that THC is a fat soluble drug. So it doesn't cross over into the oral fluid. We're actually testing for residual smoke in the mouth. So essentially, when somebody smokes or eats an edible, it's like a paintball going off in somebody's mouth. And we have to actually pick up residual parent drug in that donor's mouth. As a result of that, we're limited to up to 24 hours of use with an oral fluid test. Realistically, with OralTox, it's probably lower than that. It's probably somewhere between 8 and 12 hours. But we do say up to 24 hours. There's a lot of variability in that. The reason I think this is interesting is because if you were to ask me this question 2 years ago, I would have said this is the biggest limitation of oral fluid testing. And I think today it's actually somewhat become an advantage, because as we get requests every single day from employers that are either asking, what should we do about testing for marijuana in states where it's been legalized, or asking us to remove THC from the testing panels, because they want to continue to test for the oxys, the opiates, the cocaine, really the drugs that are driving crime and ultimately, causing people to steal from employers to support their habit. And so now we actually see THC, because we're treating it more like alcohol. That limited window of detection could be a benefit in that we're not necessarily disqualifying, let's say, the weekend warrior that may be smoking marijuana legally on the weekends. But we definitely want to know if somebody's coming to the workplace or at work impaired. And so, obviously there's a lot of discussion still going around this, but the reality of oral fluid testing is that for the fat soluble drugs, which is really THC and benzos, you have a more limited window of detection than you do in urine. The old myth is that in urine we can test THC for 30, 45 days. And the reality is that, yes, it's possible, but more realistically, again, for that weekend warrior, smoking on the weekends, not smoking throughout the week, let's assume that they're somewhat active, they're drinking a lot of water and exercising, maybe 3 days. So it's not as long as, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little bit less, depending on that individual's metabolism, but it really isn't as long as we tend to think it is. For the water-soluble drugs, which are methamphetamine, cocaine, opiates, basically the rest besides THC and benzos, there's not as big of a difference in terms of urine and oral fluid testing detection windows. Next, we'll look at rapid. So in addition to rapid oral fluid testing, there's also rapid urine testing, in which companies utilize either a urine dip or an integrated urine cup, in which they're collecting the urine and reading the results within minutes. Both solutions, whether it's urine or oral fluid, are delivering instant results. But of course, with urine, there is more of an ick factor, and it's also susceptible to adulteration, just like urine lab-based testing or urine collection site testing. So you have the same limitations as you would with any other urine test as well. It's not 100% observed in the workplace setting. They're going behind a closed door. So with that, we'll go into another scenario or poll before I hand it over to Bill. So Esther is the designated employer representative, DER, at a trucking company that's regulated by DOT modality FMCSA. Can Esther implement a rapid drug testing program as part of her DOT? Give you a few seconds to answer again. So 87% of you are right on. No, rapid drug testing is not permitted under DOT at this time. However, outside of DOT mandated testing, Esther may consider rapid testing for her other employees. So that is important to note. So if a company has certain employees that fall under DOT and certain that do not, you can utilize rapid testing for those employees that are not under DOT. And with that, I will pass it over to Bill to talk a little bit more about why rapid drug testing.
All right, thank you, Casey. Excellent job. Let's talk a little bit about why rapid testing. You consider the fact that right now in the United States, the levels of substance abuse in virtually all age categories is increasing. So over the last 4 to 5 years, well, actually over the last 10 years, we've seen a steady increase in the levels of substance abuse according to the federal government's annual National Survey on Drug Use and Health. So we know drug abuse is going up. Not coincidentally, so is the number of states that are legalizing marijuana. So we're seeing more states legalizing marijuana, and we're seeing increases in the levels of substance abuse in virtually all age categories. So never before has there been a greater need, perhaps, for drug testing, as more and more people are actually using illicit drugs and in many cases testing positive for illicit drugs. Now, let's look at the breakdown by industry, okay? So this again is from the federal government. It's from the very same survey that shows the levels of substance abuse among all age groups, but then it breaks it down by employment status, employed full-time, part-time, or unemployed. And then within those groups of people who are employed, it can tell us the percentage of substance abuse among those who are in different industries. So let's think back to what Casey was talking about. Rapid testing is excellent in safety sensitive workplaces, right? We want to know right away when there's reasonable suspicion or for cause, just as one example, whether somebody is under the influence of drugs at that moment. So we want a rapid result for that scenario. Look at the list here. You know, it starts at the top with the lower levels of substance abuse and works its way down to the higher levels by industry. And so you see as we go down there, many industries that are safety sensitive oriented in terms of the types of jobs that their workers typically do. Right in the middle at 7.4% is manufacturing, 7.8% wholesale trade, go down a little bit to 11.6% construction. And also look at the demographics that are typically represented by the people who work in these industries. So if you go down all the way to the bottom, the industry with the highest rate of substance abuse among its workers is accommodations and food services. We know that in the food services industry, for example, they're hiring from a younger demographic typically, and that the rates of substance abuse among these younger demographics is actually among the highest. And so that industry overall shows a 19.1% level of substance abuse. Now, the way the federal government does this survey, among different things, right? The surveyor represents him or herself as somebody doing this survey on behalf of the government. So I don't know if we're always getting an honest answer or not, right? But just going by the statistics we have here, the numbers that you're seeing on the screen, these percentages represent those who indicated that they had used an illicit drug at least once in the last 30 days. So these are people who the federal government classifies as regular substance abusers. Somebody who's used drugs at least once in the last year would be, those numbers would be even higher, right? But we're narrowing it down to those who admit to using an illicit drug at least once in the last 30 days. And there are some concerning numbers among some of the industries that are very safety sensitive oriented and some of the industries that are hiring from the demographic that's more likely to be using drugs. So as we go to the next slide, we look at rapid testing as a solution in safety sensitive workplaces, right? So rapid results provide valuable information when lives are on the line. Think about that. As an employer, you're concerned about the safety of your workplace. You want to make sure that every day you've done the best that you can as a company. You've made a good faith effort to ensure all of your workers that no one's on the job under the influence of illicit drugs. But you don't always know that if under certain circumstances, like in a post-accident scenario, for example, or a reasonable suspicion scenario, for example, if you've got workers on the job and you're waiting, as Casey talked about, 1 to 2 to 3 days to get a result back. You can know with rapid testing within relative minutes whether that individual is going to test positive or not. And as she said, it's a qualitative result. It's going to give you a yes or no answer. Under certain circumstances and in accordance with some state laws, you're going to send that sample to a laboratory for confirmation testing. But we know that the majority of all drug tests, even reasonable suspicion drug tests, are negative. So we're going to know very quickly that this individual maybe doesn't have drugs in their system. There may be some other reason for the erratic or unsafe behavior of that individual that triggered the drug test in the first place. But we're going to know, we're going to have that sense of peace and comfort knowing that that individual does not have drugs in their system because we got a rapid result to prove it. Now, there's another area of drug testing that doesn't get talked about as much, but I think it's a growing area of drug testing, and it's called pre-access testing. This is where workers come to work in the morning, let's say to start their shift. It could be any shift during the day, and they're tested with a rapid result device like Casey was describing, and you're going to know instantly whether that individual has drugs in their system or not, at or above the cutoff levels that we're using. That way, everyone who's working knows that every other coworker passed their drug test that day, and that's why they're on the job. It's pre-access testing for everyone who's working that shift. And that creates a sense of confidence among your employees that you're doing your part as the employer to make sure that the workplace is as safe as possible when it comes to substance abuse. And it gives you, the employer, the comfort of knowing that you've done your part and that there's nobody on the job as of the start of the shift that tested positive, because you're not going to allow them to start their shift with drugs in their system. Okay, when to use rapid testing. I want to clarify something. If you go to the second bullet there, you can use rapid testing under any scenario. It's not limited to pre-employment, although it's great for that, or pre-access, as I just described, because it's ideal for that. But you can use rapid testing for random testing. You can use it for post-accident testing, for for-cause testing or reasonable suspicion, because it's the rapid result that you're looking for. Now, there are scenarios where you're going to want to use a lab-based test. I get that. I'm a fan of both, of course, but there's no limit to when you can use rapid testing. Now, I'm going to talk about some state laws in a minute, and there may be some restrictions that apply, and I'll clarify some misunderstandings in that regard. But generally speaking, rapid testing aligns very well, at least conceptually, with every other form of testing, whether it's random, post-accident, pre-access, etc. And there's a cost savings that's involved in it as well. So as Casey was describing, you're not necessarily going to send that worker or that job applicant to an offsite collection site. That's going to take time, especially in the case of a current employee, where it's going to take a little bit of time to send that individual to the collection site. He or she may have to wait some period of time at the collection site before it's their turn to provide a sample. And there's going to be a wait that's involved in waiting for the test result to come back from a laboratory. In the case of rapid testing, you could conceivably, especially with oral fluid, you can with urine rapid testing as well, but in the case of oral fluid rapid testing, you're going to conduct that collection and test on site very easily with trained individuals, whether they're professionals that you bring on to the work site, or in most cases, according to the federal government anyway, it's going to be individuals that have been trained to conduct that test on site, company employees. And so there's a cost savings involved that, at least for those initial screen tests, are going to, you're going to be able to get a fast result back, and you're going to save time and money in the process. Now, it's not really directly related to what we're talking about, but it does have a connection. So we know back in October that the federal government finally released lab-based oral fluid testing guidelines for the federal government, mandatory guidelines for oral fluid testing. Those guidelines only apply to lab-based oral fluid testing, but as you read the guidelines, you find a lot of the federal government's opinions about oral fluid testing. And one of the things that they pointed out, and we anticipate these guidelines eventually being adopted by the U.S. Department of Transportation at some point in the not too distant future, and that's in federal government speak, so that could be a year or two down the road. But they talked about the fact that most employers within the federal government, because that's where the regulations apply right now, would choose to do their own collections. And so the government anticipated that there would be a major paradigm shift in how employers looked at the collection process. And so you can apply that concept to rapid testing, whether it's urine or oral fluid, and imagine to yourself the cost savings that you would experience if you were doing those collections on site using your own employees. Some employers may not be comfortable with that. That's okay. You can still send them to an off-site collection site, or you can bring in professional technicians to conduct the test. You'll lose some of the cost benefits, some of the savings benefits that are inherent with rapid testing perhaps, but you can choose to do that. The key here is to work with a provider that gives you those options, that's willing to train your employees so that they can conduct the tests on site with a rapid result or rapid device, or whether they can provide you with an off-site option or alternative if you choose to go that route. Either way, the point is there are cost savings to be realized, and you can do a return on investment to compare the two, and you can use rapid testing under virtually any scenario. So let's look at a scenario. Let's do our next poll. Larry operates a refinery and needs to administer pre-access testing for all who enter the site. Again, remember, pre-access is before you go to work, you get screened to make sure that you're drug-free. Larry needs a fast, cost-effective, and easy to administer solution. Should he consider rapid testing? Okay, true or false? Yes or no? True would mean yes, he should. False would mean no, better not to. What do you think? Okay. Jessica, show us our answers. All right, so virtually everybody said true or yes, he should consider rapid testing. And the reason would be because rapid testing is designed for this scenario. I mean, it's just an ideal match for pre-access testing. You've got the speed of the testing process itself and the rapid result and the ease of use. For a pre-access testing situation, it's an excellent option, something to consider. And as Casey was talking about, you eliminate the potential for adulteration. Whether it's rapid testing with urine or rapid testing with oral fluid, you're just not giving the individual an opportunity to really cheat on the test. Okay, next one. Now, let me talk about adding rapid testing to your program, or if you're a provider on the line, how to talk about that with your client. Now, state drug testing laws are very important when you're talking about any type of drug testing. Okay, and I've provided this map that kind of color codes the situation with the various state laws that are out there. Let me say this as an explanation of these colors. Excuse me, fighting off a cold here, so I apologize for the hoarseness in my voice. Dark blue, permitted. Light blue, restrictions apply. Gray, prohibited. And then white, neither permitted nor prohibited. Let me explain this though, because it's not exactly black and white, so to speak, okay? Let's look at the gray states, for example. Arkansas, right there in the middle. Arkansas is a state that has a voluntary drug testing law. Sounds like an oxymoron, right? Voluntary law. In Arkansas, as well as in Ohio, as another example, you have laws that are voluntary for the employer when it comes to drug testing. For example, the state here in Florida where I live, for example, and you see I put that in dark blue and I'm going to explain that right now. Florida has just like Arkansas, just like Ohio, a voluntary law that says I as an employer may qualify for a discount in my workers' compensation premiums if I drug test according to the guidelines provided by the state. If I meet those guidelines and they dictate how to do testing, when to do testing, etc., then I can apply for the 5% premium discount. Great, that's wonderful. For some small businesses, that's going to be a great option to consider. In Arkansas, outside of that voluntary drug testing law, you're free to do rapid drug testing, even though the voluntary law may require lab-based testing. It's a small percentage of employers in that state that would qualify for the workers' comp premium discount. But outside of that voluntary law, there is no law that prohibits rapid testing in Arkansas. Ohio, virtually the same thing. Now, some states like Kentucky, West Virginia, a few others, have industry-specific laws that only apply to employers in that state. Maybe it's mining, for example. Companies in the mining industry are required to drug test according to guidelines provided by the state. In those scenarios, it's a mandatory law, but it only applies to employers in that industry. Outside of that industry, there are no restrictions on using rapid testing in Kentucky. Let me explain Florida, for example. So Florida has a voluntary law, and it's a great law. It was one of the first ones in the country, and it offers a premium discount on your workers' comp insurance. Years ago, the way most people interpreted the law, it sounded like it only would permit lab-based testing, but that's changed. It's not the case. You can do rapid testing in Florida. Outside of the voluntary law in Florida, there never was a restriction on rapid testing. So as we look at this map and we look at the color coding, I just want to clarify that even when a state has certain restrictions in place, it doesn't mean that you can't do rapid testing if you want to do rapid testing in that state. And even in the gray states, those are typically states with voluntary drug testing laws, not in all cases, but in most cases. And outside of the voluntary law, there may not be any restrictions that would limit you or prohibit you from doing rapid testing. In states that, the light blue states where it says restricted, I just want to point out that some of those restrictions are just best practice type of requirements. For example, confirming non-negatives at a certified laboratory or some other testing process that you're probably already doing or you would do anyway. I like to think of them as best practice requirements. Doesn't restrict rapid testing in the sense that it would convince you not to do it. It would just probably require you to do a certain way so that you're, basically getting the most out of your rapid testing program. And so that's how this map works. Rapid testing is mostly allowed throughout the country. Now, I'm a big advocate of drug testing policies, and this is an important point to make. Adding rapid testing to your drug-free policy is absolutely 100% essential. You must articulate in your policy how you're testing, and you want to confer with the state laws that apply to you so that in each state you're complying with that law. And as I said, rapid testing is generally permitted everywhere. There may be some best practice requirements that apply to you. There may be some voluntary laws that would preclude rapid testing, but outside of those laws, you're okay. But you want to make sure that your policy, your written drug testing policy, reflects those requirements in each state. I'm often asked, Bill, I'm in multiple states. I'm headquartered in Kansas, but I'm in multiple states. Which of all these states is the law that I have to comply with? And the answer is you have to comply with all of them. So if you're in multiple states, some that have best practice requirements for rapid testing here and there, and in other states that don't, then you have to make sure your policy reflects that with some state addendums that articulate the requirements or the best practice requirements for each individual state. We know that under the DOT regulations, only lab-based testing is permitted at this time through, incidentally, certified laboratories. That's okay. But it's important to note that you can drug test even your DOT covered workers in situations outside of the DOT regulations. So there are many companies that conduct different types of drug testing of their DOT covered workers under their own separate company authority, a policy that applies separate from the DOT regulations. You must comply with the DOT regulations if you have those covered employees. It doesn't mean that you can't do rapid testing under different scenarios under company authority. It just means under the DOT regulations for the DOT required testing, you must comply with those regulations. Now you're going to pick the type of rapid testing device that you're going to use, and that's going to be articulated in your policy. Some of the things you're going to want to consider is the window of detection, whether adulteration has been a concern. Are people getting away with cheating on their drug tests? If so, you're going to take that into consideration. We already talked about the state law requirements. We're going to get into a couple of things there in that last bullet, but before I do, let's look to the right of the screen and look at the cutoff level chart, the window of detection chart for the different types of drug testing. So you see on the left where the window of detection would start. The red line represents blood and the blue line represents oral fluid. And you see that both of them are all the way over to the left, meaning that drugs become detectable in a blood sample or in an oral fluid sample almost immediately after the individuals use the drugs. On the right of those two lines, the blue and the red, you can see that the window of detection closes a little bit early compared to urine, which is the yellow line, and hair, which is the brown line, meaning that the window of detection may be shorter, but it starts sooner. So for example, let's say an individual goes on their lunch break and they come back and they smell of marijuana. That may, according to your policy, trigger a reasonable suspicion drug test. If you're using a rapid oral fluid testing device, like Casey described, that drug use is almost for sure going to be detectable in that oral fluid sample, and you're going to know within minutes, really, that the individual is positive. Yes, there's marijuana in that person's system, THC. And you're going to know that with a rapid oral fluid device because it detects the presence of the oral fluid in a tighter window of detection. Yes, if it detects the drug in the oral fluid sample in a tighter window of detection. A lot of variables apply, okay? The amount of the drug used, the individual who was using the drug, the testing device that you're using, the specimen that's used with that device, whether it's oral fluid or urine. A lot of factors come into play. So I hate to make real sweeping general statements about that, but generally speaking, you can count on a rapid oral fluid test to give you a fairly reliable instant result that shows that the individual was using drugs fairly recently because it's going to be detectable in an oral fluid sample pretty quickly after the individuals use the drugs. Best practices for rapid testing: use an FDA cleared device. Casey referred to the oral tox as being an FDA cleared device. This is important, but it's also important to know that it's a requirement by some state drug testing laws. Some state drug testing laws are very specific when it comes to what type of collection device you use and what type of rapid testing device you use. If it requires you to use an FDA cleared device, by all means, you must do that. But it's just a best practice anyways. It's just a smart business decision because you have the assurance that the Food and Drug Administration has cleared this device to perform in a way that's consistent with other similar types of devices. That gives you an assurance that you're using a quality product, because it's not easy to get FDA clearance. It takes time. And sometimes you go back and forth with the FDA until you meet the requirements. But any device that's FDA cleared has met those requirements, and you can have an assurance that it's a good quality test almost always, okay? Follow up on non-negative rapid results, a good idea, especially if you're going to take some type of employment action based on that rapid result. So if you're going to fire somebody, if you're going to suspend somebody, if you're going to require somebody to go to a treatment specialist or a therapist to be evaluated, a substance abuse professional, or if you're not going to hire somebody, it's good to know it's good to know that there are some states that require it, but it's just the best practice to confirm that result at a certified laboratory and to have an MRO verify the lab result. There may be an explanation. There may be a legitimate medical explanation, and it's going to come back as a negative. It may take a little bit more time, but you're also going to have the assurance that you know for sure that this individual tested positive. You've got that with the rapid result if you're using a good quality product, but you're going to be able to defend that result in court if you have to, if you send it to a laboratory to be confirmed and you had an MRO verify the result. Keep in mind that some state laws will require that. And so in those situations, you got to do it. but just like using an FDA cleared device, it's just a smart business decision to do that. Okay, here's our final scenario poll question. Kyle is an owner of a small construction company and has decided to implement random testing. What should Kyle do to add rapid testing to his program? Consult state laws, update the company policy, and notify employees, educate supervisors, choose a device, and all of the above. Take a moment to answer and we'll get right back to you. Okay, Jessica, show us our results. Yeah, that was a pretty simple one, right? All of the above. You're going to want to change your policy after you've looked at all the state laws that apply to you. You definitely want to inform your employees. You want to train your supervisors. If you're going to have workers, employees who are going to be conducting the tests, you want to make sure they're trained properly. If you're going to bring professional technicians, you want to arrange all of that. And you want to be working with a provider that is flexible, that can do all of that for you and help you get that done. You're going to want to pick a device that has can test for the drugs that you want to test for, maybe the drugs that are required by the state that you're in. You're going to look at the window of detection like we talked about. Keep in mind, rapid testing is a great deterrent to any type of drug test cheating. And you want to deal with a company that's going to have the inventory in place, in stock of the devices that you're using, so that you can get to those devices as quickly as possible to conduct your rapid testing program. So with that, let's move on to, and I actually have control of the slides, questions. So I'll turn the microphone back over to Jessica to let us know any questions that we have from our audience. And I actually have, if I could get the questions started myself, Casey, I have a question for you if you're unmute your line there.
Sure.
Okay, so I referred a little bit to these new mandatory guidelines from the federal government. And of course, you know, we acknowledge the fact that they only apply to the federal government, meaning federal employers, and that at this point, they're only talking about lab-based oral fluid testing. But I'm kind of wondering from a rapid testing perspective, what benefit would come from having those regulations around in terms of helping employers maybe understand the benefits of oral fluid testing and how you might translate that to rapid oral fluid testing?
Right. So I mean, I think it's a good question. I think ultimately, as you mentioned, it is specific to lab-based testing. So I think, you know, in terms of the benefit of oral fluid testing and what we're always trying to articulate, right, is just to make sure we're describing, you know, what exactly, as you mentioned, are we getting from that oral tox screen, and with the goal being to weed out the negatives, and knowing if we have a situation where it's a non-negative, we're going to perform additional confirmatory testing, which for us, we typically use the IQ, which that obviously would follow under those guidelines, the confirmatory piece of it. So I do think at some point it will extend to rapid testing, but obviously we're not there yet.
Okay. And I have another question, but Jessica actually has a question from the audience. She has a couple of questions. Let's ask the first one, Jessica, so we make sure we get those audience questions in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bill and Casey. And for those of you who are on the call with us, if you have a question, please feel free to enter it into the question section. And if we don't get to it in the next 4 minutes, then we obviously will reach out to you offline. But the question that I wanted to make sure that we got to, it reads that when you say the rapid test is FDA approved, does that FDA approval address the concern with past instant tests being prescription use only issue? And so I think that's probably for Casey. And then also, is there a disclaimer on the kit that says that the results must be verified by a lab?
Okay, sounds good. So great question. There is. According to the package insert, we absolutely recommend as a best practice procedure, this is a screen. And so again, when we talked about how screens work, it's a non-specific test that's qualitatively identifying the presence of a drug class. So for instance, if we take the opiate strip again as an example, If we have opiates as positive, based on that rapid test, there's no way to know definitively, is that because of the Tylenol 3 prescription that somebody has? Is that from the Vicodin or the hydrocodone prescription somebody may or may not have? Is it from morphine because they were in a surgery or at the hospital over the weekend? Is that from heroin use, or is that a combination of all of those? So from a screen, and again, not just a rapid screen, from any type of screen, whether it's a laboratory-based screen, urine or oral fluid, it's giving us that qualitative result indicating the presence of a drug class. If we want to know definitively what drug it is, that's where the confirmation with high complexity instruments come in, where we can see not only definitively this is Vicodin, but also a quantitative result with the concentration. At that point is where we would have an MRO, which is a medical review officer that actually works with that donor to obtain a valid prescription based on the company's policy. But yes, it's absolutely, and that's consistent for all rapid tests. They should, at least as part of your FDA clearance, have very specific language around the importance of a confirmation test.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. Casey, is the OraSure Instant Fluid CLIA waived?
Great question. It is not. So right now it is FDA cleared, so it can be used in a clinical setting. However, it cannot, sometimes physicians or providers want CLIA waive cups because they can bill back a CPT code. So at this point, there are no rapid oral fluid tests that are CLIA waived.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that information. We have our last question, just some clarification. Casey had shared in the pro and con slides that it's difficult to detect THCs, all those T's too close together. But Bill stated in his graph that THC can be seen. So this participant is confused if oral testing will show THC, excuse me.
Bill, do you want to take that or do you want me to take it?
I think Bill, go ahead.
I was just enjoying hearing you talk, Casey, so I'd put my mic on mute. Well, the short answer is, but Casey will give us the more technical and extended answer, is that you can detect THC in oral fluid. And so I apologize if I misled anybody into thinking that you can't do that, but you can detect THC in oral fluid. I think that was the question. Casey, you want to elaborate?
Elaborate a little more. I think what I was talking to was we had it in the column and positioned as what I would refer to a limitation in oral fluid testing, is that THC, because it's fat soluble, we can't test for it as long in oral fluid as we can in urine. I think that the situation Bill was describing is, and one of the big benefits of oral fluid testing is that we can immediately detect it after use. So in urine, we have to wait for that drug to metabolize. And so depending on an individual's metabolism and the particular drug, it can take between 6 and 14 hours to show up in a urine test. Whereas Bill mentioned, if someone leaves during lunch break and they smoke marijuana and they come back, likely if we were to administer a urine test, that would be negative. But oral fluid will pick that up within minutes. And so it's not necessarily, does it work for THC or does it not? It's just understanding the different advantages and limitations of each methodology. And for oral fluid, if you saw Bill's chart there, the graph, we have quick, more immediate detection after use, but that window is just shorter for THC in oral fluid than it is in urine. But it is absolutely effective. It's, again, just understanding if somebody smoked 3 days ago and we give them an oral tox, and they admit to us that they smoked 3 days ago, don't be surprised if that test is negative, because it just can't go that far back.
Great. Thank you for the clarification from both of you. I feel like I've learned a tremendous amount on this webinar today. And so on behalf of OraSure Technologies, we'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar. We hope that you have also found it very educational and informative. This presentation was recorded and you will receive instructions informing you on how to access the recording via email. This presentation did qualify for continuing education from SHRM, HRCI, and from CCDAP. And all those who attended the live 1-hour presentation will qualify for those credits, and you will receive an email with instructions on how to apply for those credits. And with that, this concludes today's webinar. We thank you for your attendance. Have a great day.